From the United Kingdom, home of great drama and great comedy, comes the new season of Brexit. With 5 weeks to strike a trade deal, the suspense is already building, but critics contend there's nothing funny whatsoever about the UK government's opening gambit in negotiations, a bill that, of its own admission, would break international law. It would offer Boris Johnson's government the right to override a divorce deal signed only back in January, one that safeguards Northern Ireland's access to the EU in accordance with the 1998 Good Friday Agreements that ended decades of sectarian conflict. We'll ask whether this is more than mere posturing and whether even suggesting breaches in what's already been signed could have lasting scars. Also, does it lessen the chances of a trade deal, or will there be no impact? Why now? Polls show that British subjects squarely favor a deal and really don't want more uncertainty, what with COVID and the fear of a back-to-school spike in cases. Does the same populist touch that won the Prime Minister a thumping majority in Parliament last December still work when it comes to managing not one, but two major crises? Today in the France 24 debate, is Boris Johnson saying, forget what we signed with Europe? With us is Paul Thompson. He is Vice President of British Conservatives in Paris. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
From Brussels, former Conservative member of the European Parliament, Sajjad Karim. Thanks for being with us.
Good evening.
Also with us here in the studio, Catherine Coron, Associate Professor at Panthéon-Assas University.
Good evening.
Thanks for joining us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. I'm being told by my producer that, yes, we do have our fourth guest. Yes, we do. Oh, let's say hello in that case to Billy Kelleher, former Irish Minister for State, Irish Minister of State for Trade and Commerce, member of the European Parliament. Thank you for being with us.
Good evening. Thank you.
Now, first came a leak, then the confirmation in the House of Commons on a Tuesday with, well, a forthright statement, you might say.
Yes, this does break international law in a very specific and limited way. We are taking the power to disapply the EU law concept of direct effect required by Article 4 in a certain very tightly defined circumstances. And there are clear precedents for the UK and indeed other countries needing to consider their international obligations as circumstances change.
Sajjad Karim, does the Northern Irish minister get points for honesty?
Well, this is indeed a very serious situation that has arisen entirely by an act that has been brought about by the current British government and its negotiating stance. I can certainly tell you that there is sufficient strength of feeling within the United Kingdom and within the British Parliament in both houses, the House of Commons and indeed the House of Lords, and also within the committee structures with various committee chairmen having spoken out as well, that whilst the government might have made this particular announcement yesterday, it certainly is not a done deal by any stretch of the imagination. The legislative process still has to be completed in the House, and this is a bill that is going to receive a very rocky reception with a very rocky road to progress through both houses of Parliament.
You're saying that there's a chance that the bill could die in Parliament. Do you see that happening, Paul?
I think it's difficult to say what's going to happen, and one of the questions raised in your introduction, namely what is behind all of this, I think is relevant right here in our discussion, because it's conceivable that this gambit, if you like to call it that, is in fact essentially tactical in nature, designed to spur the EU side to spring into life and not to just cling to its rigid, very doctrinaire positions. My own personal guess is that that is really what's behind it, and the technical aspects, which are important, there's no doubt about that, are a bit less important, or should be understood in that context.
All right, so it's a tactical maneuver, you say. Before I turn to Billy Kelleher about this, let's take a look at some of the broader reactions we've been hearing this Wednesday as Boris Johnson told Parliament, yes, it's full steam ahead for what's being called the Internal Market Bill. James Vizina has more.
The Prime Minister and his friends, a parcel of rogues, are creating a rogue state.
Accused of presiding over a gang of outlaws, Boris Johnson's determined he's found a way to circumvent the Brexit withdrawal agreement.
This UK internal market bill is about protecting jobs, protecting growth, ensuring the fluidity and safety of our UK internal market. My job is to uphold the integrity of the UK, but also to protect the Northern Irish peace process and the Good Friday Agreement.
Under the Internal Market Bill, trade between home states would continue steadily, giving it powers to manage checks on trade between the countries. A move that goes against the withdrawal agreement struck in 2019, and party members have openly admitted they were stepping out of line.
Yes, this does break international law in a very specific and limited way.
The Act requires that both the EU and the UK address issues together, in particular with regards to the border in Northern Ireland. But while Boris Johnson says he's acting in the interests of the Good Friday Agreement, European leaders are concerned that Britain's self-centred decisions could hamper talks between the two and undermine trust. Both sides are looking for a new trade deal by the end of the year. After an 11-month transition period, Britain will then finally make an economic breakaway from the continent.
Billy Kelleher, are you reassured by what you just heard from Paul Thompson that it's early days, it's maneuvering here?
Well, if it's manoeuvring, it's a real breach of trust in my view. I mean, simply, we have a situation where we have a withdrawal agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom. That's in place. It's an international treaty, and that was underpinned by legislation that flowed through the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And now we have a situation where an internal markets bill is fundamentally unravelling very important aspects of that in terms of Northern Ireland. Bear in mind, Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, announced in the House of Commons that this particular legislation would be against the international law and the treaty that has been passed by the United Kingdom and the European Union. So from that perspective, it really is very concerning. And more importantly, it's concerning from the Irish perspective in the sense that the Good Friday Agreement is a cornerstone of the peace process. It's an integral part of the political settlement on the island of Ireland. And anything that undermines or unravels that simply cannot be accepted by the people in Northern Ireland and by the Irish government and by the European Union.
Were you surprised?
I was stunned, being quite truthful. I could not believe that a nation like the United Kingdom, that has been around a long time, it has signed many, many treaties over many, many years, that it would not stand by its word. Its word must be its bond, and the United Kingdom at this late stage should withdraw that particular provision in the bill and to ensure that they comply with their legal obligations, their moral responsibility and their political responsibility to the people of Northern Ireland in the context of the Good Friday Agreement. So from every perspective, I am appalled and alarmed that the UK government could, at this late stage, decide to just unilaterally withdraw from its obligations under the Withdrawal Act and the international treaty between the UK and the European Union.
European Commission President Catherine Coron saying this would break international law and undermine trust. In a tweet, she reverts to Latin, pacta sunt servanda, the foundation of prosperous future, equals the foundation of prosperous future relations. What is this about? Is this because being a little bit transgressive is part of the political game these days?
Probably. I mean, this is probably Boris Johnson's way of negotiating. Yet, I'm not certain he really has a strategy. I would rather see that he...
Could the strategy not be shoring up the base of people who are hardcore in favor of Brexit?
It's difficult to have to behave the way he behaves and have a long-term strategy because you don't know how people will react to what you do. That's the first thing. What I think is that the Irish question had kind of disappeared from the negotiation. It's coming back every time a no deal is kind of coming as the only perspective. I think in Europe, people had forgotten that for the British, the main problem is the Irish question. So it's kind of becoming a British question, which will have, I think, I agree, to be settled by the British Parliament.
Yeah, Paul Thompson, we're supposed to be talking about fish today and about negotiating over how open the borders would be. Why are we back to talking about Northern Ireland?
Well, I agree with what my learned friend across the table has just said, that I think Boris Johnson is trying to be transgressive and that it is a deliberate negotiating tactic. It is true that I myself found this maneuver somewhat surprising, I have to admit. However, I do not think that the goal of Boris Johnson or the British government is to undermine the relationship with the Irish Republic. On the contrary, I'm sure that he attaches great importance to that. And indeed, in the negotiation leading up to the withdrawal agreement, there was a very good series of negotiating sessions between Boris Johnson in person and the Irish leader. And I'm sure that he continues to attach as much importance to that relationship. I think that the framing of the Irish question as being ultra-central to the entire Brexit process was a trap that was set for Great Britain and in which Theresa May joyfully...
I thought we'd settled it back in January.
It was supposed to be settled, you're right.
All right. Sajjad Karim, you heard there Catherine Coron question whether or not there is a strategy on the part of Boris Johnson. Is there?
Well, this is not strategy. This is actually tactics. But one also has to question, well, how effective is this as a tactic? Does it achieve the purpose that he's trying to achieve, and that is for the European Union to once again reopen the withdrawal agreement and back down? Now, that certainly hasn't happened, and that is not going to happen. And the second thing is that this is not going to actually proceed through our parliamentary processes unamended. I can predict to you a situation at the end of the legislative process that you will find a bill that becomes eventually an act that is completely in line with the United Kingdom's obligations to international law. I do not foresee any other outcome coming out of this process other than that. It will be passed, but it will be passed after sufficient amendments so that we as a country fulfill our ongoing legal obligations.
Billy Kelleher, are you reassured?
Well, firstly, I have to say that there was no debate around the impact that Brexit would have on the island of Ireland during that particular campaign, either from the Conservatives that were pro-Brexit or the Brexit Party or UKIP or anybody else. There was almost no consideration given to the impact that Brexit could have on the island of Ireland. And more importantly, from the legal perspective, there was no debate around the impact it would have on the Good Friday Agreement. And as I said, the Good Friday Agreement is an international treaty between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. So before we ever had a withdrawal agreement, there is legal obligations on the UK to stand by its word and to ensure that the island of Ireland, people can move north, south, goods, services, freedom to ensure that citizens can operate and the economy can operate unhindered. And that is an obligation they have to live up to. Anything that threatens that or diminishes it undermines that particular agreement. And as it stands, the Internal Markets Bill as published does do that exactly. It does undermine the very essence of what we're trying to achieve on the island of Ireland in ensuring that there's seamless movements of goods and services, that people can operate north and south, and that we build on the all-island economy and the political institutions. So I just hope that the bill as published will either be withdrawn or drastically amended, and that the UK will live up to its obligations that it signed recently with the European Union in the context of the withdrawal agreement.
Paul Thompson, your reaction when you heard Sajid Karim saying this could backfire miserably if, well, UK negotiators are not trusted in the negotiating process?
Before I address that, just let me say that I think that the prognosis made that the bill is liable to be substantially amended with the end result that problems that are identified today may have essentially disappeared or been cleared off the table. That strikes me as being a plausible scenario. And once again, I would like to answer your question about trust. No, I don't really think so. Politics is a rough game. There are rules in order to try to make it civilized, but there are certainly times when it's quite rough, and I think that is what one needs to keep in mind in understanding what is going on here. And I think that it needs to be recalled that two things. First of all, the position of the EU negotiators is something which I find unfathomable, because they proceed in a way that simply does not take cognizance of the fact that Brexit has happened. The whole point of Brexit is to give the United Kingdom more control over its own destiny, therefore more legislative autonomy, and calling for a level playing field across wide major areas of public policy, completely fettering the legislature of the United Kingdom, and just sticking to that for months and months and months on end, to me is a remarkably rigid. And I think Boris Johnson is reacting to that. I think you need to keep this context in mind.
Very briefly before we go to the break, do you agree that EU negotiators are not taking into account that?
I think that everybody has to take into account the context of the COVID-19 sanitary crisis. Europe has decided to react against this crisis as Europe. And at that time, unfortunately, Great Britain decided to leave. So problem is that they focus probably more on their common reaction to COVID-19. And if a country decides to quit, well, I think here things are too difficult for each country and for even the EU as such to take into consideration the Irish question or things which have to be, this is my outsider point of view, decided within the UK.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the COVID factor. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at Boris Johnson's surprise decision, well, to put the agreements, the divorce deal that was signed back in January with the 27 members of the EU, and back on the table with doubts over the Northern Ireland border, just as we're heading into the home stretch of negotiations over a trade deal. They need a deal by mid-October. With us to talk about it from Brussels, a former member of the European Parliament, Sajid Karim is with us. Also in Brussels is Billy Kelleher, member of the European Parliament, former Irish Minister of State for Trade and Commerce. Here in the studio, we're pleased to welcome back Paul Thompson of British Conservatives in Paris, and also pleased to welcome back Catherine Coron, who teaches at Panthéon-Assas Paris University. Billy Kelleher, the Foreign Minister of Ireland, saying the British government has, quote, decided to cause chaos. We talked about whether it's strategy or tactics, but deciding to cause chaos?
Well, look, I mean, the views that are being expressed by the Irish government are in line with the feelings of the Irish people, being truthful, because I mean there is this very strong attachment, as I said, to the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement. Now, anything that jeopardises that is something that we feel very strongly about, and you know it would cause chaos in the event of the British government going ahead, acting unilaterally, withdrawing from what was agreed, tearing up the withdrawal agreement, and just going ahead with a no-deal scenario without putting anything in place with regard to the border on the island of Ireland. So from that perspective, the Irish government is extremely concerned, because you know we have spent many years building this peace process. It is working, it is functioning. We have peace on the island, we have an all-island economy, we have people moving north and south, and we have basic rights and entitlements across the island of Ireland. And anything that would diminish that would be chaotic. So from that perspective, if the British government is being cavalier, if it is using the Northern Ireland peace process, if it is using the border on the island of Ireland as a bargaining chip with the European Union, well then they are on a very dangerous road, because it could unravel all that has been achieved. And I don't mean to be alarmist, but we have to put it in the context of where we are. You know, we're an island of 6 million people. There is political division on the island, but people are working together for the betterment of society at large and for citizens, regardless of what their political view or outlook is. So from that perspective, diminishing those chances over the next number of months and using Northern Ireland as a negotiating chip is wrong. And I just want to take issue there with something that was said earlier on. Like, this was not a trap. We weren't using the Irish issue as a trap for the UK. The bottom line here is there is a Good Friday Agreement. The UK gave no consideration to the issues on the island of Ireland during the Brexit debate, and the people that put this on the agenda was the Irish government, the Irish people, asking the European Union, saying quite clearly that we had to insist that in any settlement the instruments in the Good Friday Agreement would be upheld and vindicated. And that's what it was about. It wasn't about trapping the UK or anything else. It was just about vindicating what is an international agreement between Ireland and the United Kingdom in the interest of peace on the island of Ireland.
It was used in the overall process to trap the UK. I'm not saying the issue itself was a non-issue. That is not at all what I was saying. It's an important issue. There were many important issues. That was one of them. But it was concluded in these three preconditions. And it was in that sense that I was indicating that I think it was indeed a trap which Theresa May fell into.
All right, we can debate a long time about what happened there at the time. But Billy Kelleher, we just before the break, you heard Catherine Coron mention how there's kind of a Brexit effect on all of this, and this illustrates to a degree to just how much Ireland and the UK are, their economies and their livelihoods are intertwined. We heard a statement this Wednesday from the Prime Minister Boris Johnson talking about, because of COVID, reducing the number of gatherings to 6 people. But of course, he was there talking about England, not even Wales or Scotland, or certainly not Northern Ireland. So when you see the UK's COVID policy, how much does that impact what goes on where you're from?
Well, of course it impacts. I mean, first and foremost, I mean, there's varying authorities in charge of health across the United Kingdom and on the island of Ireland as well. So we don't have uniformity of views on how we address the COVID challenges on the island of Ireland between north and south. And obviously there are different authorities overseeing the challenges facing the pandemic in Scotland and England as well. So from that perspective, there is differing observations of what we should be doing. But from our perspective on the island of Ireland, the more we work together between the north of Ireland and the Republic, you know, would allow us to deal with the challenges that the pandemic and the COVID-19 crisis has brought to bear. But there is strong linkages between the economies of the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom as a whole. And from that perspective, if you have a weakening UK economy, well, then that impacts on the Republic of Ireland and vice versa. So from all those perspectives, The obvious thing facing the UK government is that a deal should be done. And the deal should be done based on what has already been agreed in the withdrawal agreement to ensure that we don't have upheaval, not just in Northern Ireland in the context of business and the cross-border trade, but in the UK itself. It could have a very, very damaging impact on the UK. And if you look at all the statistics coming out, the UK economy is struggling. It is contracting at a fairly rapid pace, and that is because of a number of issues. But uncertainty is the enemy of investment. Uncertainty is the enemy of employment, and for all the reasons that are happening in the last number of days, this creates further uncertainty, even chaos to a certain extent. So at this late stage, the UK government, should try and find some way of coming back to the table in an honest brokering manner and try and agree something that will benefit all the citizens of the UK, the island of Ireland, and the European Union.
Part one of our discussion, Sajjad Karim, you highlighted or stressed the nuance between strategies and tactics. But let me ask you, when it comes to both, how's Boris Johnson doing? Our correspondent in London pointing out that press conference he gave earlier is the first one he'd given since July on the COVID crisis. Do you get the sense that there is a clear strategy when it comes to this Brexit negotiation?
Well, the biggest challenge actually that the UK faces alongside with having to potentially face a no-deal Brexit is the unity of the United Kingdom itself. And one thing COVID has done is actually brought to the fore a very clear demonstration of how those binding ties are today being tested. And in a no-deal Brexit scenario, how much more they will be tested. Now, if Boris Johnson does have a strategy, it's not one that is at all clear, other than possibly to him or one or two others who are very close to him. Look, what is the situation today as I stand in Brussels in front of you discussing this? We have a situation where today the European Union actually would be well within its rights to turn around to Boris Johnson and say, OK, this is a situation that has now been created directly by an action that you have taken, a bill that you have presented. We therefore now have no choice but to firstly go ahead and prepare for a no-deal Brexit scenario, because we are a matter of weeks away. And secondly, the bill that you have sent to us and you are using as a tactic, go and get it through your Parliament. And you better be very quick with getting it through your Parliament, because the negotiating space we have got left, both in terms of time and in terms of after the presentation of this text, the space is very limited indeed. So go and get it through your Parliament.
Yes, let me ask you on this.
Once you've got it through your Parliament, we can see the text for what it is, and we then know exactly what we are dealing with.
Well, so, Sajjad Karim, just tell it to us straight here. These claims that there just hasn't been very much progress, or not much work, in fact, done these past months, that there's at best, I saw one quote, a 30% chance of a trade deal come mid-October. Is that just the usual noise when you have this kind of bargaining?
Well, one could actually be forgiven for even working on the basis today that the amount of time that has passed and simply not been used in the most effective manner may have been part of Boris Johnson's strategy. But it is all leading to one thing, and that is a very high risk of the United Kingdom crashing out of the European Union without a deal on the 31st of December. And let me tell you one thing very, very clearly. If that should happen, the people of the United Kingdom are not going to forget the promises that were made by this government, by the Leave campaign, by Boris Johnson. They are not going to forget them, and they are not going to forgive this government for the absolute calamity that will ensue in a no-deal Brexit situation, piling further on the difficulties that the United Kingdom is now facing with the whole COVID situation.
Would no deal be a calamity, Paul Thompson?
No, it would not be a calamity, because that's a very strong word, but it would be an undesirable outcome.
And there's that new poll out by YouGov which shows that a resounding majority want a deal.
More
than 50%, 28 against.
I'm sure that Boris Johnson wants a deal, and that the members of his cabinet and his close advisors want one as well. I think that the person who's just spoken was probably not a strong supporter of Brexit in the first place, and that therefore he's taking a sort of dim view of what Boris Johnson is trying to do. I don't think it's obscure at all what he's trying to do. He is working towards a scenario which corresponds to the usual scenario in Europe, in the European Union, of which the UK is no longer a part, namely a lot of horse trading, a lot of jockeying for position, with a view to coming up to an overall deal in the final stretch when a series of big issues are all tackled in tandem together, and the real decision makers, who are not Michel Barnier or any of the people around this table, but people like Emmanuel Macron, Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel, and the other national leaders, actually decide what's going to be done. And I think there's maybe a 30% chance of there not being a deal.
Okay, so you're more optimistic. Sajjad Karim?
Much more optimistic, yes.
I must take issue with what has just been said. For this reason, I cannot recall a single negotiation that the European Union has been involved in where the other party has attempted to rip up the basis of the agreement, an international treaty, at the 11th hour. That simply has never happened before. So to say that this is a negotiation in good faith being carried out by Boris Johnson, I'm afraid, just defies all logic. It goes against process, and above all, it actually goes against the very nature of the United Kingdom and our history.
I would dispute that, Dave. I may just say very quickly, within the European Union itself, there have been situations where hugely important legal norms were merely tossed out the window. For example, that the European Central Bank should not finance
This is a treaty that was signed in January, though.
That is
not dry yet.
That is the point. Is that in a political context, situations may arise where people will maneuver in certain ways, and that is something which France has done on very important issues. The one I just mentioned. And Britain is not going to. In 5 years' time, I'm sure that the reputation of Britain as a reliable international actor will not have been dented in the slightest by this affair.
All right, disagreement there from Sajjad Karim on that point. Catherine Coron was mentioning it. We have dueling crises with COVID and Brexit. And when it comes to the pandemic, the Pew Research Center found that Britain, alongside the United States, were two of the Western countries that really fared the worst in terms of public confidence in their nation's handling of that crisis. There you see the graph up on your screen. If you look at that graph, just another point to that, which is that many countries saying, and the UK among them, 2/3 in the UK, Catherine Coron, saying, if their country had cooperated more with other countries, they would have handled it better. 2/3 of those surveyed.
Well, I think this COVID crisis shows that cooperation is probably the way to go out from the crisis. And I was really interested by the fact that uncertainty is dangerous. I agree with what was said. And if you want to help the economy recover, you should probably not head to uncertainty. The idea is more to reassure people. And of course, the level of welfare state, both in the UK and in the US, means that however the amounts which were given by the government to help recover from the sanitary crisis will probably have a long-term impact. This impact will probably appear by the end of the year, beginning of next year. There is always a lag in the economy. So things now probably, I think that when Boris Johnson tries to put more uncertainty and tries probably not to ask the questions or deal with the questions which have to be dealt with, I think it's dangerous, yes.
Billy Kelleher, again, is it about the way politics is done more and more these days, where it's easier to deal with an enemy than with a problem?
Well, I think there's a certain element of truth in that, but I mean, there's two enemies out there at the present time. One is the COVID pandemic itself, and then the fallout from what has happened in recent days and probably over the last 3 years in terms of Brexit. So there are two issues that have to be dealt with. From the point of view of the UK and the COVID crisis, nobody takes joy in seeing any country struggling to contain the pandemic and to deal with it. And every country was on a learning curve. There is no doubt the UK early on in March was probably slow to react in terms of closing down and ensuring that there wasn't contagion across the population. But, every country is trying to learn and to deal with it. But to bring it back to where we are in terms of uncertainty, the idea that an economy can function long term, not knowing where it's positioned in the world, really unravels any chance of certainty. And with regard to trade deals, and the UK being out and about in the world, offering itself as a partner. I mean, the most important thing in any partnership is trust, is honesty. And certainly over the last number of days, British view of trust and honesty has certainly been questioned. So from that perspective, I would urge that, the UK government itself, from its own interest and that of the people of the United Kingdom, would come back into the negotiating table in an honest, upfront, trustworthy manner and allow the deal to continue to ensure that we can have a seamless move of the UK out of the European Union and that we can work in partnership. Because if there's a crash-out deal, it won't be an Australia-like trade deal, it won't be a Canada-like trade deal. The UK will be trading on World Trade Organization terms, and that will not be good for the United Kingdom, it won't be good for the island of Ireland, and it won't be good globally as well. So it's in everybody's interest, and certainly that should be the priority of the government now.
Ireland could have another friend across the Atlantic, it seems, because one of the senior advisors to Joe Biden has tweeted that a deal with the UK on trade would be out of the question if the Good Friday Agreement was tossed out the window or thrown in limbo. Your view on Billy Kelleher, again, how much does that election in the US matter to all of this?
Well, look, I mean, this issue has been discussed over a number of years now in terms of the Good Friday Agreement. Bear in mind, the United States of America has stood foursquare with the island of Ireland in terms of bringing about the peace process. Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern, the Irish Prime Minister, spent an awful lot of time working with the political organisations and parties and the people on the island of Ireland to bring about a peace process. So the United States have put a lot of political capital into the peace process. And across the aisle, both Republican and Democrat have said quite clearly, anything that diminishes the Good Friday Agreement, anything that undermines it or threatens it, will be viewed very, very seriously and will undermine any capacity for the United Kingdom to do a quick deal with the United States of America. And bear in mind, it's not the President does a deal. These trade deals, have to be passed by the Capitol Hill and the houses themselves. So from that perspective, it's not just a case of Prime Minister Johnson picking up the phone to President Trump. They have to go through the legislative process in the United States. And I can assure you, there is friends of Ireland in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party because they see the value of peace on the island of Ireland.
Sajjad Karim, the Good Friday agreements, are they safe?
Well, this was something that was pointed out actually right at the outset to the incoming administration of Theresa May and thereafter Boris Johnson. So this idea that in January, when this current government and Prime Minister were signing the withdrawal agreement, they frankly simply didn't understand the significance, I am afraid is not something that stacks up. Now, this is a matter of very real great concern because The Prime Minister has got to try and square a circle, and it's a very difficult situation in which he finds himself based upon the politics that he and those that supported this whole Brexit process have created. But the really sad thing in all of this is that we, after decades of having invested in making sure that the people on the island of Ireland genuinely had peace, we today have a new generation of people that have been born and brought up knowing nothing but peace. Today we are potentially taking them back decades, and that simply is not something that many of us in the United Kingdom, in Britain, see as a price worth paying. And I completely understand when a long-time ally like the United States comes out so forcefully to try and protect peace in the United Kingdom.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. But I want to thank you so much, Sajjad Karim. I want to thank Billy Keller as well for joining us from
Pleasure.
Brussels. I want to thank Paul Thompson, Catherine Coron.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. We have to end early.